Level 1 Deutschmark random encounter with my first problem player. I was asked elsewhere on the sub to share this story, and it got a bit out of hand for a comment, so I thought I'd share it here. So this ended up being longer than I wanted. But it's hard to really appreciate this guy without context. TLDR at the bottom. So some context, I'm a first time DM for D&D 5 years in. I've been doing it for about 5 sessions now, and I absolutely love it. Been playing D&D as my first tabletop RPG for about a year and change now. And this fall, when our regular DM started having life issues, I offered to run a campaign I'd been toying with for a while. And then we could switch campaigns back and forth to let people play more, but reducing the work on the DM. All this was well and good. We talked about the world setting. I got backstories. We discussed classes and options for character flair, etc. One rule I set was that I was conditionally allowing homebrew stuff, but I reserved the right to modify or pull it entirely at any time if it started interfering with the campaign, which I thought was reasonable. One of my characters talks about how he wants to be sort of a clever, mechanical type, kinda like the dwarves in Elder Scrolls, my comparison, not his, and having vaguely remembered an engineer class, agreed to let him try it on the aforementioned conditions. A couple sessions go by. Everyone's having a blast. Balance is a little tricky because the party is huge red, 6/7 PCs. It's a lore source campaign, as in, count your rations and ammo. Sandbox style campaign with lots of lore and puzzles and fast, brutal combat. Enter Douche Nozzle. Douche Nozzle is an interesting character. He's played a ton of RPGs. Probably more than our next most experienced players combined. A few things to note. Douche Nozzle likes to fuck with DMs. He'll spend all campaign trying to line up a gotcha that will break the campaign. Think supercomputer, or airship, or some weirdly specific combination of spells that you let him flavor. But now that flavoring results in something that breaks everything. To do this, he often relies on dice rolls and superior real world knowledge, that is. He's an engineering dork to bludgeon DMs into kinda going along. Douche Nozzle fudges dice. Like, a lot. I heard that other DMs have had suspicions after the fact. But I had him roll for an incremental task more than a dozen times at one point, and with a +5 modifier he still only rolled less than a 20 twice. He only rolled less than a 23 times the whole night. I ran the numbers for his rolls last session while writing this, and even giving him a generous underscore buffer, and accounting for his 1 bad roll and 2 still pretty fucking good rolls. And the odds are somewhere in the ballpark of 1 into 20 million. Douche Nozzle is a JRPG protagonist. If the plot isn't about him, he gets tilted. I once played a game with him where his character didn't speak common and no one else could speak his language. And he bitched and eventually rage quit when the two most developed and character-driven PCs finally got a chance to interact and talk backstories because people weren't talking about him. Damn it. Dork because he doesn't actually know what he's talking about. He just has access to Wikipedia and thinks he's an expert. Anyway, Douche Nozzle talks to the other DM and asks if he can get into our campaigns that are going. I agree, since I've never personally played for the guy. So Douche Nozzle wants to play the engineer too, but he also wants to play a UA race. He originally wanted to play a talking donkey. Needless to say, I shot that shit down. I agree on the same conditions as before, that is, if it's broke I will work with the player to modify or pull it entirely as needed. Douche Nozzle shows up for the session, and I work him and he wakes up the sole survivor of a military convoy that got wiped out by a rampaging plot device. This is where things start to go south. Things go to hell almost immediately. The PCs realize there are two forces, a group of cavalry and a group of infantry, both coming directly at them. Most decide to hide until the infantry are identified as orcs, at which point my brother, who had never done any real role playing up until this point, announces that he steps out of cover and pulls his crossbow to single-handedly fight this entire horde if he had to. Douche Nozzle decides to take this moment to attempt to repair a wagon in full view of the enemy, despite the fact that he and his character are fully aware that orcs will kill any non-goblinoidans and goblinoids they get a hold of. A huge fight breaks out as one PC's interactive decision to stand against the tide turns an attempt to hide into an accidental ambush. Spells are flying. Orcs are all over the place. One of my PCs realizes that Ascension sword they picked up earlier has the ability to fly. A kobold sorcerer gets into a fight with an orc that keeps rolling nat 20s to evade AoE attacks. Good times all around. The cavalry, however, ends up being another matter. Led by the son of the king who used to own the magic flying talking sword. He's rather pissed and wants the sword back. The sword is nonplussed about this to say the least. The party ends up in this tense as hell social encounter while surrounded by potentially hostile cavalry dealing with a very pissed off young prince. Due to some bad decisions and roles on the part of a couple PCs. One PC actually gets stabbed and goes down in this encounter and another nearly gets beaten into unconsciousness. The whole fucking time I'm doing this voice acting the angry and immature prince. The seasoned cavalry lieutenant. The sword that communicates as much in ideas and metaphor as it does with words. Douche Nozzle keeps pestering me on how his attempts to fix the wagon are going. For those of you skimming, let me repeat that, while the rest of the party was engaged in an extremely tense social encounter that nearly resulted in the death of 2 party members, Douche Nozzle was repeatedly pestering me on how his attempts to repair a wagon were going and asking if he could make more rolls. Anyway, no thanks to him. The party does manage to survive, and they stop to take stock of their situation, as 2 players are having an interactor conversation far from the rest of the party. Douche Nozzle keeps interjecting with sage advice his character has at them despite the fact that he can't hear shit. They take stock, recover, and prepare to move on in the following sessions. I'll let him fix the wagon finally, partially to shut him up, partially because they are heading for some very rough terrain that the wagon won't be able to cross when low, and behold he tries to make oars and make it into a land boat. I suppose I should point out that every time I shot down one of his ideas, he started sulking and complaining more and more. By the end, when I told him no motherfucker, you can't make a telescope out of glass from a blast crater in a desert, he was actively glaring at me whenever he actually made eye contact. The session ends when one of our players realizes it's 1:30 AM and that they had an hour drive to get home. People pack up. We are talking about how much fun it was. Everything's good. There's just one minor issue. I later announce that I'm reworking the engineer. See, the last thing Douche Nozzle did was pull out a compass that could be used for perfect lie detection with no saves. He didn't use it for that purpose, but it alerted me to the issue and later inspection revealed a number of Brackenishal items in the engineer's suitable list. The guy who started underscore the engineer thing agrees almost immediately he's in this for the role of playing. The actual class details couldn't matter less to him, so long as they don't clash with his AP. Douche Nozzle, however, throws a tantrum, complains about how I said he could yes, with reservations, tries to quote back minor shit I said when we were getting snacks back at me. Don't quote me, I know better than you. Tries to guilt trip me at least underscore 5 times. I don't guilt trip. This is my table, motherfucker. Side note, it's about here that I realize that he had some big campaign breaking thing he was working towards that I just ruined. He starts making vague comments about not really seeing anything else that would work for him really, with the implied threat that he might leave the table. This has worked on other DMs in the past who just want everyone to have a good time. We're afraid of conflict, etc. I discuss it more with him, and he talks about playing the artificer in a way, ignoring the combat balance. It'd break the resource economy I've got set up here. Before eventually I tell him to pick a core class. He can keep his UA race, rearrange his stats as needed, adjust his starting items, etc. But the engineer class has to go. He threatens to quit. I say, see ya. He quits. At the same time, the other guy is discussing options for another class. Talks about being a bard with a biting wit, very satirical in nature. Douche Nozzle asks him satire bard, and the other guy, not really being familiar with UA or even the core books, goes yeah, like that. At which point Douche Nozzle says too bad. Satire bards are UA. The implication being that UA stuff wasn't allowed. Then he comes back. Oh, you thought we were done? Now he wants to player. And I quote, non-class player. Someone who builds stuff. That kind of thing. Not getting a satisfactory response out of me. He goes to the other DM who is in my game, but to be 100% clear, is purely a participant and picks a fight with him about how he wasn't happy with how I was doing, didn't like my decisions, etc. I'll be honest, I'm not sure what he thought was going to happen here. Regardless, other DM is already pissed because he was derailing the campaign and bullying other players after said other DM asked me to let him join. Basically spends half an hour telling him to jump in a lake. At which point douche nozzle decides it's time to appeal to the next highest authority and announce that he's been asked to leave, and so, very sadly, he won't be able to participate in the campaign anymore. Needless to say, I made it clear that regardless of his take on it, he was kicked for being an ashat. Alright, pull out your bingo cards. Time for the TDLR. Had a player who fudges his roles, bullies other players, tries to guilt trip people when they call him on it, pesters the DM constantly when he isn't the center of attention, constantly interjects himself into other people's OP moments with zero cause to even be there, which I guess is pestering the players underscore when he isn't the center of attention, avoids OP because he wants to be a special snowflake and cool guys don't look at explosions or chords, refuses to play a core class because, again, snowflake. Whined to another DM to try to get him to fix my game. Whined to the party after the other DM told him to jump in a lake. Makes calls reserved for the DM read me on what other players are and aren't allowed to do. Makes it a point to try to break every campaign he's in. Huh. I guess put like that it actually is underscore pretty bad. Edit. Since I've had a few comments on this, I'd like to point out that this wasn't a wagon, just a single good roll from functional. He was basically trying to assemble a single fully functional wagon from the shattered and broken remains of about 7 or 8. A task I told him before might take days underscore, even with the right skills. And even if he did fix the wagon, no one there had horses and they were surrounded by cavalry, there wasn't anywhere to go.